Welcome to everybody to this space that we are creating virtually and in this environment where we're all here today. It's often said that our lives are made and marked by moments. As I think back, some of my most cherished moments involved a journey to and from. As a child, the train journey down to Cork to visit Granny. Moments connecting families. The journey on the school bus going on a school tour. Moments of exploring. The 109 bus for the big day in Dublin. Spreading of wings. The taxi collecting you and the friends for a night out. Moments of excitement. The bus home from Bus Oris after a long week in college. Returning to safety, to the known. The train to Sligo and transferring to a bus to Belmullet. Access to a summer job. Access to adventure. Then the big one. I open the door, sit down into the seat, the belt goes on, key in the ignition. My hands at 10 and 2, knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart's pounding. The passenger door swings closed. I hear a voice saying, "Are you ready to go?" Inside I say, "No, not a chance." And yet externally I hear my voice saying, "Yep, I'm good to go." It's the day of my driving test. 40 minutes later, I pull back into the test centre. I come to a stop. Car in neutral, engine off. I peel my hands off the steering wheel and the blood starts to flow again. Belt off, and I push the door open and step out, as does the instructor. As he walks around the car, he makes eye contact with me and he says, "Yeah, you're good to go." The elation rises inside me as I realize my newfound freedom. It feels as though I have the world at my feet, access to anywhere. Our experiences of transport and mobility shape or prevent our access and experience of the world, our access and experience to the moments that shape our lives. Today, I'm speaking to you from a place of perspective of standing at 6'2" and of sitting at 4' something. Perspective of a before and an after. Perspective of having the world at my feet and access to it all. Of having the rug pulled out from under me and rebuilding again. Perspective of freedom of access and of the barriers that can come in the way. From the moment any one of us enters the world, the environment is shaping us, and the extent to which our ability and potential is either expressed or depressed, enabled or disabled. It's only natural then that there would be a diversity of ability, mentally, emotionally, physically. You see, I believe the only thing that enables or disables any individual is the environment in which they exist. The environment legally, the environment culturally, the environment between our own two ears, and indeed the physical environment around us. But most of all, I believe in people. And people have diverse abilities over time. When we understand this diversity of ability, and we work to create more inclusive, empowering, enabling environments, we strike at the core of what it is to be human, to belong, and yet to have our individuality recognized. By daring to include, by creating access, what we actually create is belonging. We build trust, we garner respect, enable contribution. We both add and receive value. My life is experience of diverse abilities at different times. And that's the reason I believe that my story is just your story, written in different words. And there is a before and an after. So I'd like to bring you back to that journey, the train from Dublin to Sligo, the bus from Sligo to Belmullet. That brought me to my happy place. All through my teenage years, I developed an absolute passion for the water and water sports. It led me to training as a lifeguard, to becoming a surfing and windsurfing instructor. And that's how I would spend my summers, working in an Irish college in the west of Ireland, instructing others on the water. I remember on one of my first days down there that summer, cycling off to the beach after work. I remember leaning my bike up against the sand dunes and strolling out onto the sand. And as I sat down a little bit down the beach, I can remember looking back and seeing footprints in the sand. Surveying the scene, I could see the sun gently setting over the breaking waves. And next thing, I caught myself in the moment. You know when you just catch yourself? And I realized for the first time that I could remember that I was consciously aware I was alive. Aware that I was experiencing it all. I realized that I was becoming comfortable with myself. Here I was, almost 20, having answered so many of the questions we have for ourselves as teenagers, well, to a certain degree anyway. I realized I was proud of myself for the work that I'd put in to get where I was, having the summer job that I was experiencing. I was looking forward to going back to college the next year into second year of training to be a health professional. But most of all, I was excited about the summer I had and the journey, the travel I would go on at the end of it. 8 weeks later, at the end of that summer, I went away on a holiday to Portugal with 7 of my best friends. On the first day, as I'd done so many times that day, that week, that summer, I ran down the beach, dived into the water over a wave, not realizing just how shallow it was. My head collided with the sandbank, and in that moment, I broke my neck. My body went limp, and I floated up to the surface. My second time of becoming consciously aware I was alive. The following day, I woke up in intensive care. Gradually, I noticed the 8 screws in the light fitting above my head. I noticed my head was in a metal cage with tubes going down my nose, a tube going in my mouth, keeping me breathing. And it was at the end of my bed that I noticed one of my best friends, Gareth, walking in. He had this smiling but tear-filled face. I couldn't speak and neither could he, but I just mouthed the words, "It's going to be okay." I'd had a spinal cord injury. I'd had a before and an after. The way that I was going to navigate the world from now on would be entirely different. And yet, I was the same person and wanted to be involved in all of the things that I'd been involved in before. In a scenario like that, you get told a lot of what you will never do. There's a story of a life of dependence. And from the very beginning, I wanted to challenge that narrative. Balancing realism with optimism. The reality, 15% muscle function. My shoulders, my biceps, and my wrists. No finger function or movement from the armpits down. I found myself asking, why me? But I realized after a little while, as important as that question was to go through the grieving process, it didn't bring me anywhere. And so I started asking, why not me? At that stage, I discovered a part of myself that all of us have, and you have it as well. I call it the other self. It's that part we tap into when our back's up against the wall, when things have gone wrong, we take on a big challenge, or we're faced with a big challenge in our lives. It's where we find strength that we didn't know that we had. Between the jigs and the reels, I made it back to Ireland by air ambulance and eventually found myself in rehab. Learning to breathe without the aid of a ventilator was my first job. I needed something to pull me through those tough months, and so I set what to me was a very inspiring vision of getting back to college the following year. It seemed a long way away when I couldn't even scratch my own nose. Not only that though, I wanted to get back to my adventurous nature, to exploring the world around me. And 13 months later, I found myself back in college, living away from home. Quite soon, I got more involved in college life than I had been before, and frustration bubbled up inside me. Frustration bubbled up because here I was, back in the world, yet I was bumping up to barriers everywhere. The curbs weren't flat, there was hills everywhere, and that was only the beginning. Steps into buildings, wanting to go on nights out, all of the things that a normal student wants to do were now immeasurably more difficult. My friends were going on holidays, and I thought, well, why not me? And so we devised the idea of a road trip on the west coast of America, and we wanted to bring everyone on the journey with us. Breaking Boundaries documentary became a reality. Traveling the west coast, I got access to journeys again. Journeys brought me those moments that we spoke about earlier. Freedom of access to the world, challenging perceived limitations. That documentary aired, and then I came back to Ireland, back to reality. I remember the week after arriving back on Irish soil, wanting to go on a day out with my sisters on the bus to Dublin. I called a day in advance. I booked the accessible spot. Imagine having to do that. The bus arrived, no accessible spot. The indignity of my sisters having to pick me up and carry me onto the bus. Wanting to keep a low profile, embarrassed by the whole thing, a blogger picked it up and it ended up in the newspapers. I was never looking for attention, but these are the realities that I was facing. I remember another time on a first date wanting to go from the city centre out to the coast for a romantic stroll and having to call on strangers to lift me up in like a chariot and onto the train. These are things that we shouldn't have to face, but are a daily occurrence for many people with mobility challenges. But there's a good side as well. There's a side that restores dignity, that it promotes independence. There's lots of good things happening. Over the years, wheelchair taxis became something that gave me access before I was driving again, and continue to give me access, like on the day that my car broke down on the first day of a new job. Wheelchair taxi that brought me to the screening of the Breaking Boundaries documentary, challenging perceived limitations. Days like today, access now is a small key that opens a big door. It shifts the perspective. It challenges leaders. But it not only challenges leaders, it challenges each one of us to rethink how we can make improvements for mobility, for access, for all. All people are asking for is an equal opportunity to engage in and contribute to society. By doing that, we have an increased sense of belonging for all. We recognize people as individuals. We restore a sense of purpose and meaning. 75% of individuals that sustain a spinal cord injury, just like I did, never work again. Huge proportions of this is not because they're not qualified for the job, but that they can't get there. Nobody wants to be dependent, but it's true that all of us are interdependent. In the disability field overall, 30% of people work compared to 70% of those in the rest of society. 30% of people. When 1/5 of people at some point in their lives will have a disability of some sort or other, you start to realize that inclusion is not only the right thing to do, but it's good for business. The reality is that life can change for any one of us in a moment. What kind of workplace, community, services, and country would you like to experience? Because each one of us has a role in co-creating that now. We are doing well. For example, 20% of FreeNow's taxi fleet is accessible, but it's not enough. We can do better. We must do better. Designing for access and inclusion is good for business. It's good for reputation. It's good for societal impact. Now is the time for initiatives like Make a Move, a time for leaders to step up. Access Now is a statement of intent and has the potential to be a beacon of light for other parts of the transport industry. It's inspiring to me that FreeNow chooses to be a leader in striving to create access to journeys, access to moments, by shaping an environment centered around inclusion, awareness, understanding, that builds connection, empathy, and compassion. As we touched on earlier, celebrating and becoming inclusive of all abilities engenders trust, it builds engagement, it creates a sense of belonging, it demands an improvement in communication. In business, it drives retention, cohesion, but most importantly, it connects us to each other, to society, in a more human way. Just like nature, it's our diversity that makes us strong. You've had the bravery to begin tuning in today. Now I wish you the courage to continue the journey, as together we create Access Now. Thank you very much.